Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Scrimps and today I'm back with an update for my Smite Slayer build guide. We're first going to look at some gameplay featuring some of the game's harder content, and we're going to go over some common questions and get like a little more in depth explaining the actual gameplay. Then we're going to get into the PoB and explain all of the upgrades that I've made since the last video. There's a lot to go over here, so I'm just going to get right into it. Let's start with the two most common questions I've seen. How does the build perform in T17 and Uber content, and how can we make the build tankier? Since hitting level 100, I've been spamming this content and working on making the build tankier, and the results have been great. This is a typical T17 boss fight for us here, although they can get a bit too spicy if you stack things like Wildwood on top of a bunch of bad altar and map mods. I get away with running some pretty heinous map mods, and almost none of them matter individually, but certain combinations can be annoying, so keep that in mind. We're also solid in Uber Pinnacle fights, though definitely not as efficient as a dedicated bosser. If you're looking to get your challenges done, however, or just run a few for fun, then the build is great for that, and Slayer Call is very cool and good. I make a few small swaps for these fights, and we'll go over those in just a bit. I've also been delving, and have a goal of being the deepest depth Slayer at the end of the league. Here's all the Crystal King at 658 depth. The fight was fairly comfortable, I just had to handle the pillar mechanic properly, and he went down. About tankiness. Here's an example of what we can get away with, followed by an example of what we can't get away with. I dodged the first two hits of this die beam, but tanked the last three. Notice the Progenesis isn't active, but both of our shields from our graphs are. We'll go over this a bit more in the PoB section, but it's a great example of the build being fairly durable. Now this next one is a big skill issue on my part, and shows that while the build is tanky, you do still have to fairly engage with some of the boss mechanics. Rip Bozo. So far, we've shown the build handling a lot of bosses, but more of your gameplay will likely be blasting packs of monsters, so here's a Wave 15 Simulacrum. I sped up the beginning to save some time, but once the bosses pop here, you'll see that we handle them fairly quickly, and our life never really moves. It might not be quite as comfortable as an AFK sim farmer, but the build still excels in this type of content. There are so many places you can change a few things and really tailor this build to whatever it is that you enjoy farming most, and that's one of my favorite things about the build. Let's move on to the PoB and discuss everything that we've changed since the last video. Alright, so we're into the fun part. We're into the PoB, and we're going to go over the few changes we made to the tree first. One of the most noticeable things here, I have tattooed on 10 stun avoid tattoos. This can be a little bit tough to fit as you lose a decent chunk of accuracy, but I'll go over how we fixed all of that later. We've also dropped the 3 points that we were spending here to pick up our instant leech over here. You can do this by getting a cluster with fuel to fight to give you your mana leech, and then just going here gives you a little bit of extra max recovery as well as your instant leech for 1 point less, so that wound up being pretty good for us. You also see we've shaved off some of the extra points around here. We've switched into using 2 crit medium clusters. We also have a second large cluster over here. This is a Feed the Fury graceful execution out front. I've been trying to find ways to get rid of graceful execution and maybe run something else. However, it is giving us int that we desperately need. We have 160 and we require 159, so it is really tight, and every point of int you can get really goes a long way. We've also made a change in our ascendancy and are now taking Masterful Form over Impact. Masterful Form is less damage. So see here, we'll turn these off, we'll turn this back on. It is less damage. This is 51.5. When you go over here for Masterful Form, it is only 47.8. However, you'll also see over here, we are gaining a lot on our max hits by taking Masterful Form. So it's nice to be able to pick up a little bit of extra tankiness, and our damage really feels very good at all stages. This damage number that we're looking at right here is with item rarity support in. So if we go over here and we turn on crit damage, you'll see it goes even higher. And like I said, you are losing a substantial amount of damage off of this, but I think we have more than enough damage, so being able to get back a little bit of tankiness is great. And if you wanted to push the build very far on investment, you could do things like make double influence frenzy gloves, or you could try to get like a mirrored frenzy ring and use Calandra's touch with that. There's definitely way more options to scale this than Impact, and between that and the fact that it offers more survivability, I just decided it was a better option. Another thing I wanted to mention on the tree is right over here, this Keystone Strength of Blood. Now you gain access to this if you have a Lethal Pride that is conquered by the Karui, so if you don't have one of those, you won't be able to use this. This thing gives you a ton of fizz mitigation, 29.2% more fizz max hit we're getting off of this. However, you lose all of your non-instant leech, and I've tested it a bunch with this and without it, and in almost all content it feels better not to have it. The recovery you're gaining off of your instant leech is just really comfy, and you're probably not dying to most things anyway. I do think this is probably something good if you're going into Uber fights, as in those encounters, things are either going to one-shot you or you're going to survive through them, and the instant leech will be more than enough to heal you back up in between between attacks. So I would maybe test it out there if you have access to it, but this is not something I would prioritize. If you can get a decent lethal pride that doesn't have this keystone, that's perfectly fine. The final thing to go over on the tree is a great segue into gear and is also the most expensive thing I have on the build currently, and that is this guy here, Foulborn Unnatural Instinct. Now POB doesn't currently know how to handle the modifiers, so I have manually typed in everything that the jewel does when placed into this socket. And as you see here, it's just insane. It's just insane. Honestly, the reason that this video is coming out later than I had intended is literally because of this jewel. I realized what it did. I was worried the price might go up, and I wanted to be able to talk about it in the video, so I grinded until I was able to get it. These are currently selling, last I checked, for somewhere between like 160 and 170 divine for both of these modifiers. However, you do not need to have both of the modifiers. If you have the one that says grants all bonuses of unallocated notable passive skills, you will gain all of these benefits. The thing you will lose is 20 intelligence. And with only one modifier, last I checked, the jewel is only 70 divine. Now 70 divine is still expensive, but it's 100 divine less to get it with the one mod over the other one. So if you can make up this 20 intelligence somewhere else, you can save yourself a lot of money and gain access to almost all of the power that this jewel has, which is insane. Like let's go over this just real quick. You get 8% chance to suppress spell damage, 100 flat accuracy, 20% increased accuracy, 15% max life, 20% max mana, which actually does wind up mattering. We'll go over that when we get to the skills. Gain 10 life per enemy hit with attacks. This is a baby version of the Vitality on hit Watcher's Eye mod. You also recover 2% of life and 2% of mana on kill. This can make it so that in maps where we have less leech, or if there was ever a meta where Risk Scarab was good and you hit no leech, you still have some recovery options, which is just amazing. 12% damage recouped as life. This is not like an amazing stat or anything, but it's not a nothing stat either. 25% increased crit chance, and you'll notice I skipped over these two lines because I wanted to highlight them at the very end. +1 max frenzy and +1 max power. Now we already talked about the fact that we switched over to masterful form, so what this is actually doing is it's giving you +1 max of all 3 charges by putting it in this jewel socket. It can't be overstated. Like look at this over here, 9.6% combined DPS. It's also 13.8% on our effective hit pool. It's 9.8% on our max hits, except for chaos where it's only 4.7, and it's also helping us hit our accuracy cap. It's helping us hit our crit cap. Like this thing is just insane. And if you can make up the 20 int and the price tag difference is a big deal to you, settle for the cheaper one. It's still insane. If you can make the money to get the better one, obviously it's going to help. It's going to take some stress off of your other gear pieces by giving you back this 20 int. But this thing is so cool, and I don't know if it's going to be around next league. So if you're playing the build, once you have all of your other gear pieces together, I would drop everything you're doing and farm up one of these immediately. It's super cool, it's very strong, and I just wanted to take advantage of it while we have it. All right, so moving on to the gear, we're just going to go top to bottom through all of these pieces. Starting with our weapon, I have a Rockiata's Dance that's corrupted with socketed gems or supported by level 10 Fortify. This is the single best corruption you can get. I plan on eventually trying to get a nice double corrupted one, just going for it myself. However, right now I just wanted to pick this up so I could test it out and talk about it in the build. It makes your fortification a lot more reliable. It's a decent amount more damage, and it frees up your Eater of Worlds implicit on your chest piece, which we'll talk about in just a second. The downside, you're going to have to make sure that you can make up even more accuracy, but there are quite a few ways to do that, and we'll go over those here in just a second as well. So moving on to the helmet here, I crafted this. You need a good intelligence roll, and you also really want the reservation efficiency of skills. If you can get accuracy on here, that's amazing, but you can also get accuracy T1 on gloves as long as it's one of these really high rolls. Either one of those two pieces will work out fine for that. I happen to hit it this way, so I went with that. You'll notice we also have mana reservation efficiency of skills as the implicit on the helmet. Ideally, you can probably take this up to perfect if you really want to spend the money on that. It didn't really make much of a difference for me here. You see, we still have 89 unreserved mana, so getting a couple % extra really wouldn't be that big of a deal. Next up is our chest piece, and it's actually the exact same chest piece I had in the last video. We've just changed the implicits and added a tailoring orb mod. So the implicits are now increased effect of non-cursed auras from skills. On my aura setup, this is giving me more damage than the crit multi is, and it's also boosting my defensive auras just a little bit. And then we also have Fizz taken as cold. Since we have one extra cold max res from the tree, you want to make sure it's cold rather than the other elements. You'll just get a tiny bit more value out of that, but this helps our survivability quite a bit. Moving on to the gloves, these are definitely replaceable, but they are pretty solid as well. We've got 12% suppress, essence attack speed, a bunch of life. The rarity's kind of whatever. Ideally, I think you would have chaos res here, or you can get accuracy here if you didn't get it on your helmet, and then crafted damage while leeching. The implicits are important though. The non-vol strike skills targeting an additional enemy is great. You can get this up to 2 there, and then you can get 1 on your graft as well, which we'll just talk about in a little bit. The other one, however, inflict fire exposure on hit is very important. It's important that it's fire specifically, because if we have lightning or cold, it's going to hurt our damage because of Rakiata's inversion. But we need some kind of exposure to activate this tool graft right here. You get a shield off of this every time you inflict exposure. So if you have a reliable way to inflict it and you have rune graft of the warp, what winds up happening is you just have this shield up all the time. It's really good, and I think it's worth giving up the implicit for here. There's also really not another good way to get exposure, so this is what I wound up with. If you have another suggestion on how to get that doesn't hurt our damage through Rakiatas, definitely drop that in the comments, because I've been digging and I haven't been able to come up with anything so far. All right, so moving on to the boots here. These are just a little bit better than what we had before. We've got a big life roll, T1 chaos, some other resistance. Ideally, I would replace this and get like a tier 1 resistance there, but this was enough for me for now, and the rest of the boots are really good. We've switched to onslaught movement speed. That's because we have ailment immunity elsewhere. Now, you might have to take this up to perfect depending on how much suppression you have. So we're using Ancestral Vision, the Foulborn here, in order to get our ailment cap, and I'm actually 10% over, which is giving me 5% more to be able to get me to the cap. However, if you were to take your boots up to the perfect implicit, you would be able to drop this. Right now I need 4% off of this, so I would need 108% spell suppression. If you are able to get this up to perfect, then you can get to 30% and you won't need any of the extra suppression in order to hit the cap. So this would allow you to have a little bit more wiggle room in other places. However, because these boots had a lower lightning res roll, I really didn't want to waste the extra money trying to get the avoid LE ailments to perfect, and it really wasn't costing me much to have the little bit of extra suppression here, so I wound up just keeping it. Moving on to our jewelry, we talked about yoke in the last video, so I'm not going to go over it too much here, but we have changed the anoint to charisma in order to fit our skills. More on that a little bit later. Taming is the taming. It's good. It does a bunch of damage. If you want more survivability, get a rare ring instead. Looking at this ring here, I made this with the Recombinator myself, and I'm going to be coming out with a video that explains how to craft all of these things by the end of this week, so keep an eye out on that. But you can make something like this yourself, and it cost me about 8 div when I made it, including all of the costs. Again, I'll go over that a little bit more later, but you want to get a really nice rare ring here. An amethyst ring with a T1 chaos roll is the most important thing, because we're getting a ton of chaos off of that. Everything else is just kind of gravy on top. A bunch of extra damage. Getting that strength and int is helping us hit our cap for those stats as well. And then for here, we've got a belt. It's pretty similar to the one I had before. I had 3 really good suffixes, and I just got lucky crafting it, so I have a very nice Stygian Vice here. Eventually I'm going to test out Mage Blood and see if I like it in comparison to not using it. Mage Blood's super strong, but I wanted to really focus on all of the other upgrades to the build that weren't Mage Blood, and I think it's been pretty fun, honestly. Building with Mage Blood, it's pretty much the same thing every time, and so I've been enjoying seeing how strong the build can be without that item, because I feel like that shows that the build is pretty good, that you can pop off without having the busted belt. Before we get into the flasks, I really quick want to talk about the Murderous Eye Jewel here. There's one thing here that's important. You want to have a little bit of flat fire damage on here. The reason for this is so that we can get any sort of ignite, even if it's just a nothing ignite at all. Just having it is giving us an extra ailment for Yoke of Suffering and the taming. If we go over here to configs, we can turn off the ignite right here, and you'll see we're losing 6 million damage on 64 million. So it's pretty substantial. Again, you're not really going to be hitting like big ignites. It doesn't really matter what the duration is, just the fact that an enemy can be ignited at all is good for us. So make sure you get flat fire onto a Murderous Eye Jewel, and other than that, life, crit multi, anything else is good. Let's move on to the flasks here. Progenesis, this is one of our other really big investment pieces, and it's the single best thing you can do for your survivability. Because Slayer has such insane sustain already built into the class, being able to take 25% of the damage over time is just it's so good. And literally when I leveled to 100, all I did was I slapped this flask on, I ran like 70 maps of Harbinger, and I just didn't die. It felt really smooth. I was able to blast the maps out fast, and literally not one time during that was I even really that close to dying. Like, it always felt super comfortable. So if you have the money and you're finding that you're dying a little bit too much, pick up this flask. It's going to make everything feel a lot better. And yeah, it's expensive, but I promise you, for the price tag, it is 100% worth it. For the other things, I've switched our tincture over to attack speed. I think you're getting less damage off of this, right? Like, if we compare it to one of these tinctures with EpiPen, you're getting less damage, but it gives you more quality of life. Like, it feels a lot nicer, and also it means you're hitting more often, which means your leech is up more often, and you're getting more procs of your instant leech. So I feel like the quality of life and the way that this feels is worth losing a little bit of damage. However, if you're doing like uber bossing content, you might consider using an EpiPen tincture instead, as you're going to have much higher burst damage. And in those fights, really the important thing is just dropping them as quick as possible. Rounding our flasks, we've got Wine of the Prophet, which is pretty strong and it's fun, but it's entirely not necessary. If I wasn't using this, I would just use a Granite Flask with reduced effective curses or increased armor for some more survivability. Down here, I've started using a Jade Flask, and I think this feels great. We're scaling into evasion a little bit more because we've got a bunch of damage reduction from other sources, so having less hits come through in general means that even when the hits do come through, they're not that large and we can heal them back up pretty quickly. And finally, we've just got a nice Diamond Flask here with chance to gain Flask Charge on critical strike and as much crit strike as we can get onto it. The top mod is important just for giving us a little bit of extra uptime on this flask during like boss fights and things like that. And we're going to move on to the graphs here. These are really important, so I want to spend a second on this. We're using a double defensive graph setup here, and I want to go over all of these mods because a lot of them are pretty important. On the Aegis tool graph, non-vol strike skills target an additional enemy feels pretty mandatory. It's the entire reason why I started using this graph in the first place, was because tool graphs have access to that mod, and it seemed like the best tool graph for us, and it has been great for me the whole time. I am recently testing out the mod where you get 2% to all max Ellie res during the effect. I want to see if that makes a noticeable difference, because 2% is pretty nice, and the shield is up almost all the time. I pay a lot of attention to it. We also have 2% attack speed per frenzy charge. It's a corruption and it's really nice. You can probably find a graph that has most of these mods for somewhere between like 10 and 20 div with a corruption on it. If not, you can always, every time you get a nicer graph, what I've been doing is I replace my graph and then I corrupt whichever one's worse. And sometimes I get lucky and I get some things that are worth quite a bit of money. It's certainly a gamble, So if you don't have a ton of money, I maybe wouldn't recommend doing this. But if you've got extra currency to play around with and you want to try to hit something really strong, that's a great way to do it. And then also over here, I want to give a shout out real quick to Arrow for the tech in his video. I'll have a link to that down in the description. But we're using a Molten Zoff graph now as well, and I've been paying attention, and between these two shields and steel skin, I almost always have some kind of shield up, and it's really made my survivability a ton better since I switched to this setup. You can in this spot instead use a Storming Eshcraft. The lucky damage is great, and you can get a ton of extra damage from other mods on there as well, but I think the survivability offered by this is huge, and I felt like my damage was great, so I've just been using this instead. You want to get as much CDR on this as you can, and then also increase attack damage is pretty nice. There are a couple other things that can be decent, but this one is pretty much what you're looking for. And then for the last mod, I think like Graph Blood gained is probably the best, but I really place a higher priority on just making sure that all of the combat mods on these are effective, and I just interact with the tree when I can. So if you find one with a nicer mod there, that's nice, but it's totally not necessary. We already talked about the cluster and some of the jewels in the tree section, so I just wanted to highlight a couple other things here real quick. We now have a Watcher's Eye. Increased crit chance while affected by Wrath is really nice. The attack damage by Precision, or any damage mod from Precision, is pretty good. And then phasing while affected by Haste, totally not necessary, but if you can get a nice 2-mod Watcher's Eye that happens to also have that mod and you're running Haste, it's pretty great. You could also, instead of running Haste, be running Grace, and there are some mods there that would be pretty great. So you have some options options here on the Watcher's Eye. I do think the Wrath crit chance is really nice for helping us cap our crit, but it's not strictly necessary. You can get that from other places. All right, last thing we gotta talk about is skills, and the videos run a little bit longer than I'd like, so in the interest of being brief, we're only gonna talk about the things that have changed from the last video. So we're running item rarity support in just about all content. The damage still feels pretty good without increased critical damage, so getting some extra gold and potentially having some lucky uniques felt like it was worth it. The gold has at least been very good. It keeps King's March going, it gives me more money to be able to trade and liquidate my stuff on the currency exchange, so that's great. The other major change we have here is we're now running a 6-link aura setup with Enlighten 4 to enable it. We've got haste, Arctic armor, wrath, level 21 precision, and flesh and stone. Haste can be replaced with grace if you prefer to have some extra survivability. I felt like I was pretty durable already, and I like the extra movement speed from haste, so I decided to stick with that. Arctic armor is great. Something that's really nice, Arctic armor's buff applies when you're stationary. If you frost blink while you're swinging, you are considered stationary at all points during that action, and so you actually keep the buff up. So if you're in a situation where you do need to move, but you don't want to lose the Arctic armor buff, you can simply frost blink in place, and you'll be able to do both of those things. For Wrath, I'm running a level 21. This is why our int requirement is so steep. So if you're a little bit shy on int, you can always run this a little bit lower of a level and come back and level it up once you have enough intelligence to cover it. Flesh and stone is just amazing. We talked about it in the last video, and you should definitely be running it. And precision, the reason we're running a level 21 is because it's almost all of our accuracy. We're going to go ahead and go over to our calcs here and hover accuracy, and you see we're getting 1058 off of precision and we're getting 588 off of the helmet. That's most of our flat. So I've done this because I've given up pretty much all of the other accuracy on my tree, and I gave up the accuracy on the implicit. So if you're, the more of that you give up, the more you need to make that up with precision. And by having a bunch of reservation efficiency on the gear and an Enlighten 4, we're able to comfortably fit in even a level 21 precision. And I mentioned the mana from Foulborn Unnatural Instinct mattering earlier in the video, and this is why. It gave me like 25 more unreserved mana just by having a bunch more mana. So just another reason why that jewel is insane, and you should absolutely add it to the build if you can afford it. And the last thing we gotta talk about here, we switched our guard skill back to Steel Skin. I made an error in the previous video when I had Vol Molten Shell in there, and I forgot to uncheck Vol Molten Shell and check Molten Shell when I was comparing them. So if we go over here now, we'll click only enable Molten Shell, we turn off Steel Skin, we actually lose. So this puts us up to 182 with Steel Skin, and with Molten Shell, it's only going up to 173. So we're actually getting more off of Steel Skin, and Steel Skin also gives us a little bit of defense against bleed as well. If you wanted to get more armor by using like a Granite Flask or something like that, you could definitely get more value out of Vol Molten Shell than Steel Skin. But if you're set up the way I am and you're scaling a little more into evasion, Steel Skin's gonna feel a little better. Sorry for giving you guys bad information in the last video. I feel like a huge bozo, but I'm gonna recognize it here, and we've got the right information moving forward. So yeah, make good choices. Be better than me. And that's it. That's the video. I've covered everything I could possibly think of, but if there's anything that you do have questions about, definitely leave that in the comments. I do my best to get back to them every time, and a lot of the stuff that I covered in this video was directly inspired by comments I received on the first video. So yeah, if you've got any questions or suggestions or anything like that, definitely leave those there. You can also pop on over to my stream at twitch.tv/scrimps. I'm gonna be live right after this video drops today. I'm live usually Tuesday through Thursday. I'm usually live on Saturdays as well, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys over there. Hopefully the build treats you guys well. I've been having a blast with this, and I've had a lot of other people telling me that it's doing well for them. Hopefully these changes give you some places to push the build and make it feel even more comfortable so you can run whatever content it is that you want to do with it. Take care of yourselves out there. Peace.